episode number 14 with whiskey entrepreneur Dave Perkins. Welcome to The Art of Excellence, a show about people doing extraordinary things in their lives. I'm your host, Glenn Zweig. Thanks for joining me. My guest today is David Perkins. David is the founder of High West Distillery, a craft whiskey producer. He sold the company in 2016 after 12 years to Constellation Brands for $160 million. He had a career in biotech marketing prior to that, and today he lives in Utah. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Glenn.
So you had this prior career in marketing, mostly at large biotech companies, including Genentech, Amgen, and Pfizer. At these companies, were you mostly focused on bringing new drugs to market?
All the above. I got to participate in just about every phase of what I would call commercial operations. So early stage, late stage. Two of my favorite jobs, one was bringing a drug to market and one was rescuing a drug in late cycle of its life and, breathing new life into it and reversing the loss of market share.
And how many years were you working in biotech?
I think I'm going to say 15 years.
And overall, looking back, did you enjoy it? Or was there something missing for you when you were in the corporate world?
I did enjoy it. I got lucky and worked at really, really good companies. That biotech's very hit or miss and very risky, and I got to work for two that made it to the top. And companies that make it to the top, if my kids ask me for advice, I'll tell them to go to work for a company making a lot of money because it just means opportunity. And so Amgen and Genentech both were just rocket ships, and you got to do a lot. So that was fun.
So you never felt buried in the bureaucracy. You never felt like you couldn't spread your wings because you were with such large organizations. You felt they were growing fast enough. There was plenty of room for you to do what you wanted to do and be happy and make waves and make some money along the way.
Well, fair question. Certainly there were times when you felt stifled by bureaucracy, but I'd say when you were growing, the bureaucracy was less. And then, every place has its flattening of the growth curve. And at that time, people are scrambling and politics creep in. And indeed, I certainly felt that, but that was part of the gig. You knew that going into a big company, or as they grew and got bigger, you knew that would happen. So I didn't mind that. And then there's the word entrepreneur, and I considered myself an entrepreneur. And that works in companies if you're proactive and find opportunities. There's always someone that seems to care, or hopefully there is, and there was for me.
So let's talk about High West. The story I read about I guess if you want to call it the aha moment for you to start the company, was you had some wedding in Kentucky, and you got time to kill while you're there. So you decided, let me go tour Maker's Mark Distillery. So what happened there?
First of all, if you've never been there, you should go. It's extremely beautiful. Kentucky's so underrated, and the distillers are so underrated. And, we didn't know that at the time. I'd never really spent any time in Kentucky. First, it was a long drive to Maker's Mark, and rural Kentucky's just stunning. So that's the warm-up. And then you get there, and you sign up for a tour. And we were living in the Bay Area at the time, and so we'd done Napa. And we'd done wineries and tours there, and to go to the tour in Kentucky was quite a different experience than a tour in Napa. So it left me kind of wanting a little more folksy, not as educational, kind of more fun stories rather than, here's the grapes and the residual sugar and blah, blah, blah. It was more folksy stuff. And then walking through the lab, of course, or through the distillery, it's the exact same thing that Genentech and Amgen do. Distilleries are biotech companies, and they grow up yeast, which Genentech and Amgen do. The yeast have a piece of DNA that codes for a drug called ethanol, which Amgen and Genentech do. And then they isolate that drug, that ethanol, via distillation, and there's different ways biotech companies do it, but this is familiar to me. And then it smells. It smells really good. In the yeast areas and where they're mashing, it smells like baking bread. And I don't know anybody that doesn't like baking bread. And then at the end of the process, you go to the barrel warehouse. And if you've never been to a barrel warehouse, you should put that on your bucket list because they're very special. In each barrel warehouse, there's 25,000 barrels. They've been there for 1 to 7 years, and it smells like vanilla and caramel. And back to that baking bread, I don't know anybody that doesn't like vanilla and caramel. And that really went to me in my inner psyche. And I told my wife there, I said, I think we should make whiskey right on the spot. And she said, wow. And we talked about it that night. We talked about the sort of the correlation or the similarities between biotech. And there's a lot, actually. And this all happened really in one day, this visit to Maker's Mark. And the idea was hatched there. And I think all my life was preparation for that. And bam, it hit me.
So you do this tour. You have this nice visual. You see the parallels with biotech. You have some nice smells, and you decide, let me start a company?
Yeah, pretty much. I think I'd always wanted to start my own company.
Did the startup bug, had it already crawled inside you and you were just sort of waiting for the right idea to pop up? Or were you perfectly happy and content and all of a sudden something just hits you like, I've got to quit the corporate world and start something? You just were so fascinated from that tour that it just completely changed your whole thinking around the rest of your life?
I think it's a little of both. I mean, we're complex things, us people, and I'd always wanted to do my own thing. I didn't know what that was. Was I happy at my companies? I was. I had a great job. But here was this idea that came, and when we started thinking about it, it just made sense. And at that time, whiskey was almost at the bottom of its cycle for per capita consumption. And, after that day, I started moonlighting and looking into things, and it just made sense. But again, I was very happy in my job. I enjoyed it. But this was something that could make me happier. And when I talked to my boss about it, who after he was my boss, he became the president of Genentech. Good guy, smart guy. And he said, Dave, if you don't do it now, you're unlikely to do it 10 years from now. So go ahead and do it. So he was very supportive.
So why whiskey? So here you are, you've spent your whole career up until that point marketing drugs. That was your expertise. Why not do a biotech startup? Why alcohol?
Well, biotech startups are a different animal. They're much higher cost, much longer time frame. Well, whiskey, we'll talk about that in the parallels. And I would say much higher risk. Whiskey, having been at Maker's Mark, and I didn't consider myself a whiskey aficionado. I liked it. I did consider myself a foodie. And I like to cook. I like to eat. And, as I say in the barrel warehouse, those smells spoke to me. And I found out I have a very sensitive nose and palate. And to be able to create a product where I can apply some of my expertise to, as far as the craft, more than a functional expertise of marketing, but the actual making, the producing, that was intriguing to me. So I like working with my hands. I work on bikes, cars, and to be able to make something I think really appealed. And so why change? And then the marketing side of me looked at the tea leaves, the marketing tea leaves in the whiskey world. I could tell it was going to hit. Vodka hit, Scotch hit, coffee hit, chocolate hit. All these things were going through their premiumization, and whiskey hadn't done that yet. And yet here was this product that had more heritage, history, incredible craft, and the consumer really didn't know much about it, but they wanted to know about it, and I could tell that. And whiskey has a great story to talk to people about because they're fascinated how it's made, and I knew that. So there really was a lot I took from Amgen and Genentech to the whiskey world because I could tell you how it was made, same way we made drugs there. We had high government involvement in Amgen and Genentech called the FDA. Well, we have the same thing in alcohol. You have the TTB, or it used to be called the BATF. You've heard that. And one of my jobs was working with the FDA. And so I actually liked that. I liked working with government people. They're smart people. They're doing a job. Most people hate them. But, they're following a job, following rules. And, you need to help them to help you. And that's really not that hard to do. Long life cycles. Amgen, Genentech, you start a drug. You may not have anything for 10 years later. Same thing for whiskey. You make it, you lay it down, you wait 6 to 10 years. So what that means is you need a planning mindset that looks long term. And people say, well, you can't plan 10 years. Well, sure you can. It's no different than planning 1 year or 2 years. It's just out there. And I developed the tool set to learn how to plan long term. So really, it's very, very similar to drugs. I really didn't feel like I was leaving to total uncertainty. I was leaving to certainty of things I knew how to do.
So how much time did you spend analyzing the market, dissecting the opportunity, and putting together a business plan? Like, did you go on the tour and then quit your job the next day, or did you take some time sort of working through the idea nights and weekends till you got to the point where you had conviction?
I'm a planner, and I wouldn't have left the next day. There's no way. We went to the wedding in 2001, and we left Genentech in 2004. So it was about 3 years of thinking. And in that 3 years, I had visited Kentucky. I'd befriended a master distiller at one of the distilleries called Four Roses. And I just through various cold calls met people that helped give me the information and the confidence that leaving made a lot of sense. But I think that Jim Rutledge, who ran Four Roses at the time, was probably the key figure. If I hadn't have met him, I probably wouldn't have left because he helped me understand how to make whiskey, write the protocols. I mean, he was one of 8 master distillers in the world that you couldn't look this stuff up in a book. You can buy a book on wines, you can buy a book on beer, but there were no books on making whiskey. And here I had a guy helping me figure out how to do that. So that helped me a lot in reducing the risk.
As you point out, there were no books. There was no making whiskey for dummies. So you really have to somehow either figure it out on your own or find mentors, advisors, people in the business that can sort of coach you.
That's right. He was my master mentor.
So as you know, you can research these things forever and a day. You never have all the answers. So eventually you have to just walk up to the cliff edge, so to speak, and jump off. I believe you were 40 years old at the time. And then at one point you walked out the door. Was it hard to do it?
Not really. It was great. It felt great. I mean, I think for me, and my friends at Genentech had a nice going away party, and they were all supportive. And I think, no, it wasn't. It just felt right.
I mean, obviously you had the confidence, but walking away from a paycheck to the unknown, I think I read that you spent 3 years not drawing a salary. So there was a huge financial risk as well as just, of course, the emotional one and everything of starting a company. But you were so ready by that point that you had no hesitation at all.
I can't remember exactly, but I don't remember feeling any hesitancy. Because I had a proto plan. It wasn't completely worked out. I think I had a plan B, and the plan B was we were moving to Utah. There was a bit of a biotech grouping in Salt Lake City. So if worse came to worse, I could always get another job working for another biotech company in Salt Lake.
Now, I'm no alcohol expert, but if I had to think of the one state that'd be the worst place to start an alcohol company, it would be Utah for obvious reasons. Why did you choose to go there?
Yeah, I get that asked all the time. Well, a couple things. One, we wanted to move out of the Bay anyway. We'd been there for, I think, 6 years and just tired of the traffic. And, it would take 3 months to go see your doctor. If I need to see my doctor tomorrow. Well, our first appointment is 3 months from now. It's like, really? So just to move to someplace a little quieter. We just had a baby. And I was born in Denver. So I always wanted to move back to the mountains. And Utah had a draw for me. Jane and I got engaged in Moab, which is a town in Red Rock Country in Utah. We'd been to Park City, so I wanted to move to a ski town, frankly. And when we had the idea at Maker's Mark, we did want to move to Utah then as well. But the idea, the crystallization idea was making a Western whiskey in a mountain town. And the long drive to Maker's Mark in the middle of nowhere in Kentucky, I thought, why not have a distillery somewhere that's easy to get to, where people want to go to, like a ski town, and have that be part of your marketing plan, where you have tourists coming to you rather than them trying to find their way and getting lost to Maker's Mark. So it all sort of fell in place. It was really serendipitous. And then back to Utah, the worst place. The marketing mind in me said, I liked that being the people's raised eyebrow of, Utah, are you kidding me? I think that was a benefit to us, not a detriment. And then when we were here, because we didn't know we could even start a distillery in Utah, to be honest with you. We didn't know the law would exist. We thought we might have to change it. It did exist. But what we found were people in Park City they were drinkers, and they loved the idea of having a distillery because it would show to the outside world we are normal. And you can get a drink in Utah, and it's really not that backwards. So we became the poster child, in a sense, for the ski industry and the tourism industry that, this is a great place to come visit. You can get a drink. And, I knew back in my mind that would be a powerful benefit for us.
So when you spent the 3 years digging into the opportunity and coming up with a plan, did you identify a specific gap in the market, like a pain point you're trying to solve? Or was it more like, okay, it's a growing business, and if I make something really distinctive that tastes good, somehow the product's going to find a market?
I think tech looks for pain points for me. In a consumer product, it's not so much a pain point, but it's kind of the opposite of a pain point. It's a missing benefit to the consumer, and that's a Western whiskey. And that was the opportunity for us. Not only a Western whiskey, but a high-end whiskey, because most whiskeys were low-end. They were considered low-end. But here was this craft product that really should be high-end because it has all these steps, and there's a big difference between the worst and the best. And so that it was a missing a gap in something that would be pleasing for the consumer, and that would be a Western whiskey, because there were no Western whiskeys. But everybody watches cowboy movies, and they know what cowboys drink. So you don't really have to explain that to people. Everybody gets it. I don't care how old or young you are. You get that. And that just made sense to me from a marketing standpoint. It wasn't like we were making vodka. Well, I mean, even though we did make vodka, but that wasn't the brand's reason for being. Cowboys don't write songs about vodka. They write songs about whiskey. And that was a big gap.
Okay, so walk us through the steps starting up this whiskey business. You leave your job, you did all the research. What's step 1, 2, 3 here?
Well, first you need to know what your product is going to be. That's whiskey. But then there's different types of whiskey. So we were looking at bourbon. And only later did rye come to us, which is very similar to bourbon, but that was a gap too. That people have since rediscovered that, wow, there's this beautiful product out there called rye. And that wasn't in my mind frame, but Jim Rutledge, the distiller, he was the one that suggested it to me. And then the other issue is, well, you make stuff, put it in wood, and wait for 6 years. How are you going to fund your business for 6 years while you're waiting on this asset to mature? The idea didn't come from me. It came from Jim Rutledge. He said, you should buy whiskey, outsource it, that's aged, while you are waiting for your whiskey to mature. And so that was part of the plan, to outsource, much like Sam Adams. When Sam Adams started, they didn't have their own brewery. They outsourced. In fact, most things you buy as a consumer are outsourced. But that wasn't part of the psyche. But then you needed a place to do it. And I think that became the biggest play for our startup, was a piece of real estate in downtown Park City, which was a bit of swing for the fence, but it was a historic piece of property right off of Main Street in the heart of tourist area. And so we had to raise money, and the historic property turned out to be the sort of the linchpin in us raising money from a lot of people in town, because I thought if we went out of business, at least they'd have the property. So we were able to win a bidding war for a beautiful historic piece of property right at the base of the town ski lift and the ski run that goes into town, that had been out of commission for years, and the city owned it. But it was beautiful. And I think that helped us raise a lot of money.
How much are we talking about? How much is a lot of money?
Well, our first round, we raised $4 to $6 million. And we needed every bit of that to build renovate the property that we bought. And then we got a bank loan. And this was right at the crash in 2000, into 2007, beginning 2008. We got a bank loan, really to fund the building, and then the $4 to $6 million we raised really fund the whiskey and the business.
So $4 to $6 million. You had nothing to really show at this point other than your plans. There was no whiskey. There was no product. It was you and your idea behind this high-end Western theme whiskey business, and you're raising millions of dollars. People look at you like you're crazy. I mean, was this a challenge?
Well, I mean, first of all, I had a big chunk of my own personal money in it, so I think that meant a lot to people. It was a considerable part of my net worth. So I had considerable skin in the game. Second, I was told, and I think I had a darn good plan. It wasn't that I had no product. I didn't have it in my hand, but I knew exactly where I was going to get it from. I knew how it was going to taste. I knew the equipment, the exact equipment I was going to buy. I knew the building. I had an estimate. I had actual, quotes and things in hand. So I knew what step A, B, C, and D were through a timeline. But it's a fair question. People looked at me like I was kind of crazy. But then again, I also raised my $4 to $6 million, so it wasn't completely crazy.
You're very smart. You're very calculating. You're very methodical. But obviously, there's a big difference between having a plan versus being able to say, I've been in business for a year or two. Here's my sales. We're expanding, that type of thing. It's not growth capital. You're a pre-revenue startup. It's very early stage, high risk business, and you're able to pull together millions of dollars. It's impressive.
Well, that's where, and I think the real estate, the building that we had, that, I had the contract in hand because I'd won that property from the city, but we hadn't bought it yet. So that was also happening at the same time we were raising money. And again, people that handed over their dough thought, here's this crazy idea. It might work, it might not. But if it doesn't, at least we have the building and we won't lose all of our money. So there you go. That was a big piece of it too.
So a little secret of the industry is there's a pretty small number of distillers, but a huge number of labels. In other words, most whiskey makers don't make anything at all. They blend other people's whiskey. And I think that's the point you're making, which is while we're going through the years and years of distilling our own, let's go ahead and blend some other whiskeys. So there's sort of, I guess, a two-part question here. First is there that much art in the blending process that you can really distinguish one from the next? And if the answer is yes, then I'd say at that point, well, then why even bother going through the production?
That's a fair question. Many people that outsource don't go through that. They just create the brand and go with the brand. I think for me, it was in my DNA to make something. And I thought that making whiskey made me a better blender because I could understand the components and the genesis of flavor. And I think it was also important to the consumer. As you said, most people don't know. They were on a journey. They wanted to learn how this beautiful product that they drank was made. And to see ground zero and to see a base for where it was made, I think that meant a lot to people. So they could come and do a tour, and many people would walk away and would have no idea that we were outsourcing, even though we told them we were. They still might not pay attention or might not get it. So, but we were very clear with people. We buy stuff and we make stuff, and showing people how you make it was a turn on for people.
So back to the marketing challenge, are you trying to take existing whiskey drinkers and elevate their experience with a higher end whiskey, or are you trying to migrate people that are drinking other alcohol that maybe already have premium labels to it and sort of convert them over to whiskey, or all of the above?
At various times in my career at the drug companies, I had $1 million to $2 million market research budgets where I could easily answer that question. Starting a business, I wish I had the money to answer that question, but I didn't. So to be honest with you, I have no idea. However, I certainly have an idea. I have a qualitative idea. I don't have a quantitative idea. How about that? All of the above. I think we probably ended up turning on more people to whiskey that hadn't had it really for the last few years. They were wine drinkers or beer drinkers, and they might have had a bad experience in college. And, here suddenly was a chance to have a high-end drink, and you're not shooting it, you're sipping it, and someone's explaining to you what you're tasting. So it's really going through the same cycle that high-end wine went through and micro beers went through. So I'm sure we converted a lot of people because I know people told me that. I never drank whiskey for 10 years. And then certainly there was the Jim Beam drinker, the Maker's Mark drinker that would try something different. And I wouldn't say we were better. I would say we were different. And if they tried us when they were on their ski trip out in Park City, I call it the Corona effect. Where you're at a beach in Mexico and you're drinking Corona beer, and you take that vision home with you when you're in San Francisco or New York, and that brand in your hand helps you relive your vacation. I would certainly think, and that was part of our plan, is that would be our marketing. A visitor coming here and thinking good thoughts about High West because of their trip. And so those might be conversions, those might be newbies. It didn't matter to me because sales were growing, so it was academic what the answer to the question was for me.
What year did your first product come out?
Christmas 2007, so that was 4 years after we left.
4 years after you come out with your first product, all the research, all the capital raise, all this time, and boom, here's your first product. Did it fly off the shelves, or were there some hiccups along the way?
Oh, it did not fly off the shelves by any means. I expected it to go a little faster in Utah. There'd be local pride and a local whiskey. It took us a long time to get sell-through into Salt Lake and Park City because really just a lot of skeptics about Utah whiskey. So there was a lot of skepticism about that.
A long time, months, years? What are we talking about?
Well, I mean, certainly we had growth. I mean, I don't want to say we didn't have growth. So it was constant, steady growth. I just thought it might be faster. It turns out when we sold the company, I look back on our plans, our 10-year plan, we hit. 10 years later, we were right on the number we said 10 years prior.
That never happens. I think you're the first entrepreneur in the history that's ever hit the hockey stick right where they said it was going to be 10 years out.
I wouldn't call it a hockey stick either. I would just call it, gradual, steady growth. And that was part of the plan too. Just have, don't expect a hockey stick because those never happen. It was a gradual, steady uptick. But it was a lot of shoe leather, I call it. It was a lot of hard slogging.
In those early days when you get to market and you can sell into some of the channel, but you're not selling through the way you had hoped, was there any point where you sort of just took a step back and said, this is not going to work. I can't believe I left a perfectly good paying job in an industry to do this thing and I thought it was going to be easy. Oh my gosh, this is not how I anticipated. Or was that all baked into the experience and you just were patient and let things take its course?
There was never a point where I said, this isn't going to work. Never that point. Were there points where it was hard? And I was thinking, my God, this is tough. Absolutely. Because, amazingly, we hit all of our milestones. In fact, we beat many of them, getting to break even. We were there a year ahead of plan. And that break even is that key milestone for any startup and any entrepreneur. Don't run out of cash. Running out of cash is really dependent on that break even point. But because we hit the milestones, because the sales ramp was within the range of what we needed to maintain cash flow, I never had that point where I said this isn't going to work because it was always that constant, steady uptick. And, that was nice.
I read in an interview somewhere that you had come close to going under multiple times, but were saved through what you called very good contingency planning. What do you mean by that? Give us some examples.
I'll give you an example where contingency planning didn't help, but it kind of did. When the financial crisis hit in 2008, we were right at the end of building our building. We had a bank loan, and it was a construction loan that would convert to a term loan, and property values took a hit. So our loan-to-value ratio was below what a bank would accept to take out the construction loan and do a bank loan. The contingency was my wife and I had to put our house on the line to bolster the asset value of the business so we could get the bank loan. And that, for me, was one of those moments where, it's like, do you really want to do this, Dave? But everything had gone so well and so perfectly to that point. We were uncomfortable about it, but we knew it was doable. And what's the worst thing that could have happened? That contingency planning answers that question. What's the worst thing that could have happened? I mean, we wouldn't die. We might have to take a mortgage on our house, but we probably wouldn't have lost our house. So just asking yourself those questions and thinking through the consequences of your actions. Is there a downside that takes you out completely? We never had that.
Well, usually with startup loans, you have to sign a personal guarantee, which means beyond your house, they could technically get access to all of your assets. Did you do that, or did someone else provide that backstop?
No, that was me.
So when you say, what's the worst that can happen?
What's the worst that can happen? Well, we had a house that had an asset value, and if you did the math on the assets that the business had in terms of the cash we raised, it wouldn't have taken out our whole house, but it might have been a mortgage we would have had to work off. So something you'd have to do. Not an impossible task.
I don't know the numbers exactly, but there have got to be hundreds upon hundreds of liquor startups launched every year. It's become this huge, huge craze. The overwhelming majority of them, as you know, eventually go bankrupt. Very few of them ever succeed. Why were you able to succeed when so many fail?
Well, I'm a big believer in luck and serendipity. And certainly we had our fair share of luck and serendipity. Also a big believer, two big reasons why companies go out of business. You have a product that the market doesn't want. Second one is you run out of cash. So first, make sure you have a product the market wants. And we spent a lot of time on that, a lot of time on the brand. We were highly, highly thoughtful on the brand and all the dimensions of the brand. And we spent time with people thinking through the brand. And so if you come to High West, you're experiencing a brand from all aspects. And so I knew we had a good product that hit a sweet spot at a time and an opportunity, a gap in the market. A second, running out of cash. It's math, and you hope things don't go wrong, and luckily things didn't. But the contingency plan, your other question, we wouldn't spend money till we knew we had achieved a revenue target that could allow us to release gates to spend money. So we were very, very careful on cash flow and spending and budget, and we didn't overspend. And most people, many businesses overspend on things, and that's probably half of my time thinking, what can we spend when so we don't run out of cash? Rule number one: don't run out of cash.
You mentioned serendipity. Obviously, talent and hard work and planning and all those things are critical ingredients. But in terms of the serendipity, how did that come into play?
Well, all the time, and so for instance, our first product we launched was called Rendezvous Rye, and I knew it was good. I didn't know it was great. It was something unlike any product on the market, and it was this rye whiskey we had outsourced, and you couldn't buy it at the time. It was mixed into things like Crown Royal and Seagram 7, and it was a component of those that we plucked out and sold it on its own and blended it with another rye whiskey. It turns out there's a magazine called, it was called Malt Advocate at the time, but now it's called Whiskey Advocate. It's owned by Wine Spectator. And you've heard of Wine Spectator. Everybody's heard of Wine Spectator. When you get your wine rated by Wine Spectator, and if you get a 95 point, that matters a lot to the customer. Well, they got a hold of our Rendezvous Rye. We didn't even know they got a hold of it. And, suddenly we got this magazine on our doorstep that said we got a 95 point rating on it. So it was the number one rated whiskey at that time in the magazine. And that's serendipity because that helps your sales take off. So we weren't planning on that. And that was something, luckily we had enough in stock to be able to manage the ramp up of sales from that. But that made a big difference for us. So that's serendipity. Meeting the guy from Four Roses to help me write the protocols for our whiskeys, that's serendipity. Being able to get the building that we got in downtown Park City that, really, it was one in a million opportunity. That was serendipity. Plenty of opportunities for serendipity in the business.
So when you look back and you started the company, beyond creating a wonderful product, because clearly you've got this passion for whiskey, what was the goal of the company? Would you have been content, let's say, with a small but profitable lifestyle business, or were you always driven that you felt compelled to build something very big and eventually sell it?
I mean, that goes back to the planning. And if you're going to raise money from investors, every investor, for the most part, that I've ever met wants an exit at some point. And so you have to tell them that's on the radar. So was I expecting an exit? I knew it was a possibility. I never promised it to anyone. I was very clear with people. There was a range of outcomes that could range from we go out of business to we'd be slightly profitable and it'd be a lifestyle business and investors wouldn't get their money, or we'd sell out. And to be honest with you, all three of those were always on my radar.
So here you are, you quit the job, you start the company, you work your tail off for over a decade, managing all the chaos, all the emotional highs and lows of building a company, and then boom, you finally do it. You sell the company. You've climbed the mountain, so to speak, and you're standing at the peak staring over at the horizon. How did it feel? Was it what you anticipated?
It was bittersweet. Super sweet because, timing was good for us and we had a lot of suitors interested in us. And, that was nice as recognition. When we started, we were the 50th distillery in the country. Now there's over 2,000. And to have us be one of the the leading contenders for an acquisition with a lot of bigger companies. That was nice. It was nice to be able to have a return to give back to investors because they all wanted that. But here, it was a job that I liked. It was a great lifestyle job, and it was fun, and we were good at it. I've got no regrets, but still, it's bittersweet.
Is it a feeling that you want to find some way in your life to repeat that somehow?
I don't have an answer for that. Was it one, or are there others? I mean, I do have a answer that I'm not going to play golf. That's not me. But I am enjoying life now. I'm enjoying being a dad and a husband. And I'm looking at lots of things, to be honest with you. I've never been busier than now. I'm having a great time, doing things for me that I want to do rather than being, dragged into things. But I don't know yet. But I have a lot of irons in the fire and looking at lots of things. And it's hard to keep your passion down. And I think when your passion goes away, you may as well just lay down and die.
I mean, you're the living embodiment of the American dream. You took full advantage, and then you have what very few people in the world can ever achieve. And once you've gotten there, it almost seems like anything else becomes anticlimactic unless you just sort of do a mental reset and have different expectations. Are you in any way involved in coaching or mentoring other entrepreneurs or investing in other startups?
The answer is yes to both of those. I've met a few people I'm coaching, which is a lot of fun. And if I can give back and help people as I've been helped, I love doing that. Will I do something just for myself? Maybe, if it's compelling enough and I'll have fun at it. Will I do something with a bigger company? I might, if it's compelling enough and I have fun at it. So I made a promise to my wife I wouldn't commit to anything for at least a year. And so right now it's just looking at things, looking at opportunities, and I'm really enjoying that. It's a different kind of stress, but it's a good stress. I don't mind that either. So I'm really having fun, to be honest with you.
Knowing everything you know today, if you had to do it all over again, you did some things really well, you made some mistakes along the way, what would you do differently?
I think people, it really boils down to people. And with a rearview mirror, I heard a phrase from one of my mentors long ago, and I don't think I acted on it as good as I could have. It was hire slowly, fire quickly. I think I might have hired more slowly. So you're caught in a spin cycle, and you need to fill a spot and get some work done. And you have your A players and your B players and your C players, and I might have slowed down to get A players more so, because they make a huge difference to the business. Rather than just settling and filling a role when you can. So really thinking through your options on your people and making sure you spend the time.
And how big was the organization when you sold the company?
I think we were 170 people.
So where a lot of entrepreneurs struggle when they build companies is getting to the point where you can not just bring on board the right people, as you're talking about, but then the ability to truly delegate and hand off pieces of the business to other people, knowing it's not going to look exactly the way you might want it to look. They're not going to go through the same process the way you would do it. It takes on its own life. And that's something a lot of folks struggle with. They can never remove themselves from being a micromanaging entrepreneur to really being a leader. Was that a challenge for you, or did you feel your experience in the biotech companies prepare you for that?
Well, a little of both. I mean, and it goes back to people, and it goes back to trust. And, micromanaging, that's a symptom of lack of trust, that you've got the right person in the job. At least it is for me. And so, there are various functions that I would say I was not a micromanager because the people in charge of those they knew how to do their job and they were better than me. And then there were areas that, absolutely I did micromanage, and, that's a symptom of you don't have the right person in the job. And that was my learning from, I had 15 years of managing people at great companies where you could take the time and hire the Ivy League MBAs and so forth. And, it's trust is a huge part of any job. And when you find yourself micromanaging, that just means you're not trusting the people.
So we've gotten to a point in our culture where it seems like if you're not doing a startup, then you're just not living life. There are people that should be entrepreneurs and they're not. And there are people that probably should not be entrepreneurs. Is there any particular quality personality, skill, where you would look at someone and say, you may not be cut out for being, but beyond just the ability to take a risk? Obviously, you've got to have that. You successfully navigated that corporate world, and now obviously you've navigated the entrepreneurial world. Who should sort of stay in the former or not take that leap?
Well, I think, as you say, there are a lot of entrepreneurs, and we do over idealize it, and I'd like to suggest there's a lot of people that don't need to be entrepreneurs; they can be entrepreneurs, and it's not just about the setting that you're in; it's about your own personality. And I think an entrepreneur is somebody who looks for an opportunity, has plans their work, then works their plan. You can do that inside a company or outside a company. And I would, if you can't plan plot a course and plan your work and work your plan, then you probably shouldn't be an entrepreneur. But then, you'd have a hard time inside a company as well, I think. People inside a company, if they need to be told what to do and need to be said, here's the hill, go take that hill. Entrepreneur can point out the hill and figure out his own path, but you can do that inside a company. And I would encourage a lot of people to try to do it inside a company because it is a little less risky. But you can accomplish the same things. You can build the same skill sets. You can determine if you've got what it takes inside a company just as easily.
The name of this podcast is called The Art of Excellence. To be honest, I'm still learning what excellence means to me. What does it mean to you? What's your definition? Well, that's a fair question. And, at High West, I thought about it a lot, and we thought about it a lot. I think it mattered to us, and it mattered to our business, it mattered to our success. And for us, it was taking pride in your work and giving it your best. And it may not be the best product compared to somebody else, but if it's the best you can do, and always giving it your best. So for me, it was best, giving it your best, being A+ about it. And, that goes back to people. And you want to hire A+ers, and that made such a big difference to the business and our success, because they would do what it takes to get to the mountain, doing their best or doing your best and not being satisfied, but being a maximizer. That meant a lot to us. And so we thought about excellence a lot. I like that answer. David, we're going to end on that note. This has been fascinating. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to speak with me and share the story, and I wish you all the best in whatever the next chapter looks like for you.
Well, thank you, Glenn. Thanks for the questions. Very thoughtful and fun for me to even think about the answers. So thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. You can subscribe to the show at iTunes, Stitcher, and theartofexcellence.com. I've got one small favor to ask. If you like the show, please take a minute and leave us a review on iTunes. I would really appreciate that. I'll see you next time.